Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Jillian McConnell, and I am a knowledge broker and knowledge mobilization lead with Brain Exchange. And on behalf of my colleagues from the MS Society of Canada, we welcome you, and we're so pleased you're able to be with us. Before we begin, I want to take a few minutes to review the technology that we'll be using this afternoon. So my apologies if you've heard this before. The audio is provided over the phone, which means if you're hearing my voice, then you're all set. And the visuals or the slides are provided by the online link that you would have received in the connection details, and that way you can watch the slides as our presenter speaks. On the bottom left of your screen, you'll see a little blue bubble, and if you move your cursor or your mouse over to it, you will see Chat with the Presenter. If you click on that, the chat pod should appear, and that's how you can communicate with me during the event as well as with the presenter. And I do want to make mention that only the presenter and I can see the notes that you place in the chat pod, not your fellow participants. And this is also where you can send some questions during the Q&A portion. I do want to remind you that all of your lines have been muted temporarily, and that just helps minimize background noise or private conversations, sirens, dogs barking, etc. If you do need to ask a question or have a concern, then please use the chat bot, as of course I won't be able to hear you. The presentation itself is being recorded. Within a few days or so, it will be available on both the MS Society of Canada's website as well as on the Brain Exchange site. So for the purpose of today, those are really the only features you need to be familiar with. The webinar is scheduled to be 90 minutes in length. Our presenter will speak for about 60 minutes or so, or an hour or so, and then we will have the remaining time at the end for some Q&A and some discussion. I do ask that you refrain from asking questions in the chat pod until the end of the presentation as we gear up towards the Q&A, unless of course it's technology related, and then I'll do my best to help you out. Okay, so now that the technical aspects have been taken care of, I do want to take the opportunity to review a few bits of information that the MS Society of Canada has asked that I share with you. The MS Society of Canada wishes to gratefully acknowledge the educational grant received from Biogen, which makes this webinar possible. The MS Society does not approve, endorse, or recommend any specific products or therapies, but provides information to assist individuals in making their own decisions, and identification of needs, determination of objectives, selection of content and speakers, educational methods, and materials are the sole responsibility of the MS Society staff and advisors. Also, very quickly, that the mission statement of the MS Society of Canada is to be a leader in finding a cure for multiple sclerosis and enabling people affected by MS to enhance their quality of life. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our webinar topic and our presenter for today. And today we will be talking about preparing for the future. Where there's a will, there's a way. And we are so very pleased to have Karen Henderson with us today to present. As a result of a life-changing 14-year dementia care experience, Karen founded the Long-Term Care Planning Network, Canada's leading resource center for aging and long-term care planning and education. Her seminar series, website, newsletter, and print and electronic tools are all recognized as key international long-term care educational resources. For the past 25 years, Karen has been a well-known speaker, educator, writer, media commentator, publisher, and consultant in the field of caregiving and long-term care, who has been published in leading geriatric journals of Canada. Over the years, she has sat on many not-for-profit and government committees concerned with aging, Alzheimer's disease, and elder abuse. She has been featured frequently on television and radio and helped write and produce the 13-part television series Caregiving with June Callwood. Karen is a certified professional consultant on aging and is author of a unique Canadian series of print resources, including the 10-Step Long-Term Care Planner. She has worked with Canadians across Canada to help them understand the implications of aging and long-term care on financial, professional, and personal well-being. So Karen, we're so happy to have you with us today. I welcome you on behalf of everyone, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Jillian. I am very thankful or grateful to the MS Society for allowing me to talk to you today because they understand the value of planning for long-term care. And it isn't every organization in the country that understands the need for this and values the education that people can be provided with. So my thanks to the MS Society. We've worked together over the years very, very happily together, and I'm delighted to be here today. So let us move forward. Our agenda today will be about an hour, And I'll open up with talking about what long-term care is and what long-term care planning is. We'll then move into the practical part of the webinar, which is the 10-step planning process. And then finally, I have provided you with quite a number of resources that we will review so you can know where to go for help for further information. I'm not moving forward, Jillian.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I would like to express some limitations of the presentation. Firstly, because I'm talking to a national audience, some of the terminology that I may use may not be familiar to you, and I've made everything as generic as possible. I've also used generic rates or costs that I have included, and resources that I have included are not specific to any province but are national. Next, I know I'm speaking to a mixed audience of professionals, of families, and of course of people suffering from MS. But regardless of what your circumstances are, please understand that the need to plan for long-term care applies to everyone. And finally, some questions were given to me that were sent in advance of the seminar today, and my plan is to address what I can at the end of my formal presentation, given time constraints. And I can't change. Thank you. A very quick overview of me. That's my dad and I. And I was a caregiver for my father for 14 years. He died in 2000, and my friend Mimi said that his timing was good. He died on Easter Monday, that God picked him up on the way through, which always still brings a smile to my lips. My father suffered from vascular dementia and probable Alzheimer's. He suffered from crippling arthritis that put him in a wheelchair at the last years of his life. He suffered from aphasia, which means he lost the ability to speak, and dysphagia, which means he lost the ability to swallow because of strokes. And, of course, he had the usual hearing and sight problems. So our 14-year journey together was filled with probably every issue that a caregiver can bump into, but it taught me what aging is like in Canada today. And I will tell you quite honestly that not very much has changed in the 18 years since my dad has died with respect to the understanding and emphasis that governments put on long-term care. Next. So what is long-term care anyway? Well, it's a variety of services and accommodation provided to people who are ill, who are chronically ill, who have a disability, or like my dad, who suffer from a cognitive impairment. And the goal of long-term care is not to cure, but the goal is to provide the best quality of life that can be provided, whether it's at home or in a care facility. So long-term care is about care, it's not about cure. And long-term care mainly takes place at home. In fact, about 80% of it does. It also, of course, takes place in hospitals, rehab centers, or in long-term care facilities or nursing homes.
Karen, I'm just going to interject here. I saw that you have that little green arrow, so you should be able to move your slides. If you're looking for the two arrows that are in the center of the gray bar.
Yeah, let's try that one. Oh, okay, wrong arrow.
There you go.
So what is long-term care again? Well, most people think it's medical, but it really isn't. Long-term care is providing the help that people need to stay in their own home for as long as possible. And it's wrapped around what we call the activities of daily living, or ADLs. And those are bathing, eating, dressing, toileting, transferring, and continence. These are the 6 things that we all need to be able to do to remain safe and independent where we are living. How long does it last? Well, you know what? It would be great if we could put a number on how long long-term care lasts, but we can't. In Canada, we don't follow the number of years that people stay in their homes. They do a better job of tracking that in the U.S. But what we do track in Canada is the average number of years in a care facility, which is 2 to 3 years. So the real answer is nobody really knows how any one person will have to cope with long-term care. So that makes it even more important that we understand what long-term care is and that we do our best to make a plan for our needs as we age and need more care. Who may need long-term care? Well, certainly the older you are, the longer you live, the greater your risk increases for long-term care. If you're a single person, your risk increases because you don't have family that may look after you. And having said that, there is no guarantee that family will step forward to care. Women are more likely to need long-term care because we live longer than men do. Obviously, if one has a disability, one is more apt to need care. And we need to look at lifestyle, how we looked after ourselves over the years, because our poor habits, our diet, our exercise can increase our risk for care. Family history certainly can have something to do with your needing of care. And finally, living arrangements. Some research has borne out that living alone results in needing more long-term care, which of course makes sense. So here we are at the heart of our presentation, which is the 10-step process that we're going to walk through together. And here are the 10 steps. The first one is determining how you're going to look after yourself. Number 2 is deciding where you want to live, where can you live. Step number 3 is understanding your provincial healthcare system and how it functions. Step 4 is the role of governments in their provision of care services, accommodation, and funding. Step number 5 is knowing, deciding who you can count on for help, be that professional help or be that family help or help from friends and neighbors. Step 6 is really our risk management step, where we organize, manage, and store all information related to every facet of your life. Step number 7, we talk about having a plan for emergencies. Number 8 is creating an advanced care or end-of-life plan. Step 9 is communicating and updating everything that we've done in step 1 to 8. And number 10 gives us the ability to celebrate the good days because we've done our homework. We've worked through 1 to 9, and now we have a much better chance of being able to relax and celebrate the good days. So, step number 1, how are you going to look after yourself? Well, the first is knowledge. Knowledge is so important when it comes to looking after our own health. And the question is, how are you going to keep up with MS research and the developments? I know that one family where the husband has MS, they greatly appreciate any research information that comes from the MS Society through the newsletter and through conferences that the MS Society puts on. What about your attitude and your emotions as you're coping with MS? There is grief, denial, sadness, or anxiety, and how you face these will determine your coping skills. How is your brain? Cognitive difficulties play a role in MS. So how can you help your brain, help your memory with tools like a digital recorder, a cell phone with a camera where you can take pictures of things that you want to remember, and finally the old-fashioned fallback, the calendar, both print and digital. How will you cope with stress? Because stress can often have an impact on disease. And what that means is you need to understand what stresses you and how to cope with that stress. And that stress reliever can be any number of things. It can be listening to music, it can be working on a hobby, It can be being with a group of people. It can be exercise. Building a program of exercise is very, very important for every single one of us for good health. So we not only have to build it, but we have to stick with it. Diet is important. I know from my own personal research that there is no one diet that has been developed to help with symptoms of MS. And the general consensus is that we all really need to eat a balanced, healthy diet. The Mediterranean diet pops up often in the course of disease study, and the Mediterranean diet is really a common sense way to eat. So you eat lots of fruits and vegetables, you're easy on the meat, you eat whole grains, you use olive oil, you can have a glass of red wine, but it's just a very, very good way to eat. And finally, looking after yourself means using assistive devices. I know that some people find it very difficult to have to use a cane or a walker or a wheelchair, but once one understands how valuable these devices can be, it really makes just a huge amount of sense to use them. And here is a resource that I have listed in the resource pages of this presentation. The Public Health Agency of Canada has put this together. Go for it. It's a guide to choosing and using assistive devices. It's a very good guide. Unfortunately, I own one of the last few paper copies of this guide, but you can go to the link that I have provided for you, and you can either read the Go For It online or you can download it and print it for yourself. So people ask, well, what other coping skills can I use to look after myself and my health? And one of the best ways is to anticipate things before they happen. And one great example an MS caregiver gave me was food shopping. She and her husband loved to go food shopping together because they both love to cook. But it was becoming too difficult for her husband because the large stores that they went to were too bright, too big, too many products, and too much stimulation. So what they decided to do was to avoid those. So they now choose smaller places to shop, or they shop in the early morning or late at night at the bigger box stores. Another way to cope is to plan for things outside of a regular routine. So if somebody's coming to visit, you can prepare for it, and you can make sure that you have everything that you need and that your visitors understand what you need when they come to visit. Another thing I've learned is to be proactive about medical appointments. Ask for the times that make sense for you and for your caregiver. So neither of you have to rush, get caught in traffic, so by the time you get to the appointment, you're worn out. Another way to cope is to really look at communication, because communication can become problematic with MS. It's a good thing to understand how you with MS communicates best. Is it orally? Is it written? And how people can best communicate with you. And don't be afraid to reschedule things. If something is happening and it's not a good day, reschedule. Step number 2, deciding where you're going to live. Where can you live? So some of the questions. Are you living in a 2-story home with a bathroom on the top floor, or is your yard so big that it requires a lot of care? These things are problematic for people with any chronic condition. And a move to a smaller place, an apartment or a condo, might make it easier for you to live independently longer. But what I ask you to do before you decide to move is to evaluate your present home environment. Look at considering home modifications so that you can stay in an environment that is familiar to you and that you're comfortable moving around in. But please remember that it does help to work through these issues before there is a crisis, which may force a quick response to a moving decision. Home modifications, certainly an answer to staying in your own home. And every room can involve extensive modifications to keep it safe. Here are a few of the big ones that I actually had to work through with my dad. Eliminating throw rugs is a huge one. He caught his shoe on a throw rug. He twisted, he broke his hip, and then he fell. And that really was the end of things for my dad. So please eliminate throw rugs, anything that one can trip on. Ease your entrances and exits so that they can accommodate assistive devices. Replace doorknobs with levers, particularly if there's any problems with hands. Simplified stairs, and that can mean either putting a stair lift in, or if your stairs have only one railing, put in a second railing so you've got support whether you're going up or down. Make room to maneuver in your room. So if there's too much furniture, move it, remove it, get rid of it so that you can move around with a walker, a wheelchair. Make sure you can plug up in and turn on with hassle. So that means making sure that outlets and lights are available. And it might make sense if you have rooms that you and your caregiver move between, which most people do, is install an intercom system so that it makes room-to-room communication that much easier for all of you. And looking at home modifications in more detail, a resource included in your list is the Safe Living Guide, once again by the Government of Canada. It goes through your home room by room and lists extensively home modifications that can be made easily or through a purchase of certain pieces of equipment or modifiers. Once again, I'm afraid it's not readily available in print, but I've given you the link where you can read it or download it. Step number 2 also includes transportation options. So I advise getting an accessibility parking permit as soon as possible if you don't have one already. And whatever your provincial transportation service is called in Ontario, it's called Wheel-Trans. Sign up for that as well if you haven't done it. And if you want to continue driving, investigate car modification, and I have given you a link that you can go through to learn more about doing this. Step number 3, understanding the healthcare system where you live in your province. So what we're going to start with is the care continuum that exists in every province, although the terminology may be different. The first part of the care continuum, of course, is home care. It's where we all want to be, where we want to live, if possible, until the end of our lives. Next on the continuum is retirement home living. We may move from our homes into a retirement home where we can live independently, or we can have more assisted support, or we can also have memory support. And next on the continuum is long-term care or nursing home care. And this is care that you apply for, and it also can include specialized Alzheimer care. And the last step in the continuum is hospice, palliative, or end-of-life care. So let's look at these steps in the continuum on an individual basis. First, the realities of home care. Home care under the Canada Health Act is not an insured service. So what that means is that the provinces control the money that the federal government gives them for health care, and they can spend money on home care however they see fit. And quite frankly, across this country, in every province, there is an underinvestment in home care and home supports, which means that there are thousands of people who are waiting for home care or more home care. The public system is limited in the number of hours that each of us as a taxpayer is entitled to receive, and that usually means that we end up paying for home care out of pocket, along with whatever the province may provide for us. Rates start at $25 for the basic care, which might involve a personal support worker coming in to help with feeding or transferring or bathing, up to nursing care, which can easily cost $60 an hour. Home care involves equipment costs, and here I've provided the costs for the main pieces of equipment that are often involved for care at home: wheelchairs, beds, scooters, walkers, lifts, ramps, and medication dispensing machines. And once again, these are average generic costs across the across the country. Step 3 in the continuum is independent living or retirement living. Sorry, this should be step 2, I believe. Anyway, independent living, retirement homes, all of these facilities are privately owned and privately run. They provide accommodation. It could be private accommodation. It could be an apartment accommodation. They provide social events, meals, housekeeping. There are no government subsidies. It's a tenancy situation. You pay month by month. Minimal care is provided in a retirement home. Should you need more, you pay for it. And monthly costs across Canada range anywhere from $2,000 a month to over $7,000, depending on whether it's a single person, a couple, or whether it's a private room or a suite. Let's say you're in a retirement home, but you need more help. So this means that you can move to the assisted living or supportive living area. This area probably will have a nurse on staff. You will be able to get personal care, but you will be charged a fee. It may be a package fee or it may be an hourly fee. Meals will still be provided in the dining room, and the monthly rate here will be more expensive than the retirement home rate because you are paying for care. You can also move to the memory care part of a retirement home. This may be a floor unto itself, or it may be a part of a floor. It offers enhanced security, which means that there is a code to get in and out of the area. It provides special programs for people with cognitive impairments. The rates are similar to retirement home rates. Finally, we get to the long-term care facility part, which is long-term care, nursing home care. These facilities are owned and operated by cities, municipalities, religious organizations, ethnic organizations, cultural organizations, or for-profit companies. But regardless of ownership, these facilities are regulated by the province. So the province regulates the fees. The province regulates the number of hours of care. The province regulates sorry, my mind just went blank here. Oh, yes, the meals that are provided by the facility. And fees and waiting times vary by province. The fees are usually set annually. Step number 4, we're moving on to understanding the role of government in the provision of care, accommodation, and funding. So I will tell you at the outset that we do have 12 government systems in this country because every province runs their healthcare system differently. They generally all cover the costs of physician care, hospital care, and other diagnostic and treatment services. Regardless of where you live, you will be entitled to basic care in the home, but once again, each province differs in the number of hours they provide and whether those hours may be free or subsidized, depends on the province. There is generally a co-payment for facility care, but the one thing that is common across this country is that no Canadian will be turned away from having a bed in a care facility because of the inability to pay for a ward-level room. What the province will do will be to take a look at previous income tax returns, determine that indeed the applicant for the bed cannot afford a ward-level rate, And so what the province will do will be to top that up. They'll take whatever pension or other funding is available to that person. They'll top it up, which will allow you, that person, to live out their days in a ward-level bed in a long-term care facility. Some provinces take into account other assets, such as a home. Some provinces do not take homes into account. Once again, the role of government. Governments do not provide compensation for family caregivers, even though they provide 80% of the care, with the exception of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has instituted a basic plan for family caregivers. And so over the years, I've often had family caregivers contact me and say, Karen, I've had to give up my job, or I've had to take a leave of absence to care for my husband, my father, my mother. Where do I go for financial support? And the unhappy answer is there isn't any, apart from tax relief. There are no national standards for facility care. So again, every province runs its long-term care facilities differently. It runs its home care differently. And a rather unfortunate thing is that there's no national pharmacare program. And what that means is, let's say you live in British Columbia and you are on a medication that is subsidized by the province. For some reason, you leave British Columbia, you decide to move to another province, there is a 50% chance that that medication will not be subsidized by your new province. It shouldn't be this way. Every province should subsidize the same drugs, but they don't. Step number 5, decide who you can count on for help. And that help may, as I said earlier, be professional or maybe family help. But the first step in determining this is having what I call the care planning conversation family meeting. And obviously we do this because we're concerned about the health, the safety, or independence of a family member. The best time to do this is before a huge crisis occurs. So yes, there may have been a diagnosis of MS, but right after that diagnosis, there should be a family meeting to determine how the family is going to cope with that diagnosis. And how do they do that? Well, you create an agenda of things that need to be talked about. The family members gather either physically around a table, or perhaps they can do that. Some of the family will be on a conference call. But it's a time where everybody can talk, they can make decisions, they can decide who can do what with respect to providing support for the person with MS, and reach a consensus on moving forward with a care plan. But it's not only important to have this initial meeting, but it's also important to continue to communicate so the family understands what's happening and that everybody gets the updates on what's happening. It helps to plan for personal care needs. And some tips here are develop a routine. Everybody needs a routine, especially if we're not feeling well, and especially if one suffers from a cognitive impairment or cognitive difficulties. It helps to invest in anything that will make life easier, including adaptive clothing that will eliminate the need for buttons, zippers, and shoelaces, just removing one less stress. And it helps to talk. It helps to share issues between caregiver and care receiver about what's going on as the course of the disease changes, what continues to be possible, or what is no longer possible, and how we're going to cope with that. And we also need to understand what each person in the relationship wants and expects, and what is realistic moving forward through the course of the disease and through the aging process. Also, it helps to really research and make use of community services. And again, these differ from province to province, but they usually involve day services, day programs, where the person with MS can go for community, can go for programming, for events, and it gives the caregiver a break. Of course, you can hire companions and homemakers to come in to help. You can order meal programs. through programs like Meals on Wheels or through another one which we'll discuss. You can use the services of a case or care manager if you're having a problem negotiating the healthcare system. Obviously, there's physical, occupational speech therapists available. Respite care workers are great, once again, to come in to help the caregiver, give the caregiver a break. And, of course, there are also community transportation systems which can help take one to the adult programs or other appointments. And this is like Wheel-Trans in Ontario. Meal programs can be delivered through community agencies, but they can also be delivered through private organizations. One of them is called Heart to Home Meals. Now, I will say that they, at present, are only available in Ontario into Alberta, but I understand they have plans to expand. I know several people who use this service, and they think it is great. So I have given you the link to their catalog, which you can order to be delivered, or you can look online at what they offer. Step number 5, deciding on who you can count on for help. More effective caregiving results in keeping a journal. So very important that both the caregiver and the care receiver contribute to. It's the place where you write down what's happening, appointments, any information that needs to be contacted almost on a daily basis, including things to ask the doctor when you go to appointments. It's a great place to keep track of symptoms, reactions to drugs, and make sure that every time you enter something in the journal that you date it so that you can go back and see what a problem looked like a year ago or a month ago. And it gives you a better way to judge how things are changing. And it's a great way to record a caregiver's observations because we know that the family caregiver is the key to the best care for a person with MS. And once again, it helps you be proactive with medical appointments. And having been a caregiver myself, I understand how important it is to look after yourself if you are a caregiver. I remember that when I used to take my dad to appointments, medical appointments, it was pretty much all about my dad, how he was doing, the problems he was having. And I don't think anybody ever looked at me and said, Karen, how are you doing? And it is so important that professionals understand this and that we as caregivers remind professionals that we are the other half of the scale and that if we as a caregiver are not doing well, then that means our care receiver will not do well. So if you're a caregiver, you've probably heard these things before, but take time for yourself. Diarize the things that you want to do and do them. Take things a day at a time, and don't beat yourself up if something doesn't work. At least you've tried. And one really important thing is that if you are a spouse caregiving for someone with multiple sclerosis and you have aging parents, please realize that you can't be a caregiver for everybody, that you need to determine how you can help with aging parents, but you need to watch your own health and well-being for your own caregiving responsibilities for your person with MS. You can only do your best. And it doesn't help caregivers who look at life saying, you know, I could have done this, I should have done that. You know what? Caregivers, we do our best, and that's all that we can do. Step number 6, risk management. Organizing, managing, and storing information. And I realize how important this is because when I used to go up to visit my dad before he had to move into a care facility, there would be stickies all over the fridge. We need this, that is broken, so-and-so's coming in. It was a nightmare. So I did develop a tool for this. And what that tool allows you to do is record everything about the person being cared for. So everything about personal information, from the date of birth to the blood type to the social insurance number to everything, family medical history, personal medical history, biographical notes, what's important for lifestyle, and of course, everything about medical information, who the person is seeing from a medical perspective, things about allergies, medications. I mean, everything should be included in one place for easy access so that any member of the care team can access this information at any time and nothing gets lost. This place of information can be a binder, can be a book, whatever, can be a website. Also has financial information, and I highly advise families to work with a financial advisor who can help you in many different ways, but one of the biggest ways is they can help you if you face the possibility of having to leave your retirement involuntarily, which means a loss of earned income. An advisor can help you analyze your spending habits, your budget, help you downsize where necessary, help plan for a spouse and children, and help you understand any insurance policies that you have and ensure that all premiums are paid and that beneficiaries are current and correct. I can't overestimate the importance of working with a financial advisor. Part of that, of financial readiness, is having a joint bank account. I had one of these with my father, and it allowed both my dad and I to have access to a checking account so that we could both deposit, withdraw, pay bills, no matter who put the money into the account, which of course was my dad. And the account, in our case and in many cases, has the right of survivorship. So that meant that when my dad passed away, I was able to continue paying the bills, having access to this money when I needed it at this very, very important time. So joint accounts are very valuable. Part of financial information is understanding how one can fund long-term care. And here are your options. The provincial government through tax credits, your own personal savings or investments, any supplementary health insurance you may have been able to purchase, downsizing so that you might sell a home that you have and buy something smaller and take the money you've saved and invest it for long-term care. Or finally, there's something called a reverse mortgage. And this is essentially a mortgage that you take out on your home, which allows you to remain in your home to get up to, I think it's 40 or 50% of the value of your home in cash to pay for home modifications and other things that you might need. But I will caution you that reverse mortgages are legally complex and that you should never enter into one without adequate legal advice. More financial information, of course, involves tax credits. And the main one is the disability tax credit, which many of you probably already know about. But what I advise you to do is to work with another professional, an accountant, who understands the disability tax credits, like the disability tax credits that may be available to you. And because this tax credit is the first step which opens doors to other programs that might be available to you. So the DTC is vital for people to understand and to take advantage of. Other information that needs to be available is legal information. That includes a will. Every adult, regardless of circumstance or regardless of assets, must have a current will available to those who need it. And also request the lawyer who has done or will do your will to make it probate ready, which means that beneficiaries are named, that joint tenancy bank accounts are set up so that when you pass away, funds can be used or transferred quickly. More legal information that needs to be included is information about powers of attorney or POAs. There are two types of powers of attorney, one for property, finance, and one for personal care. If these are not completed, please do them as soon as possible with a lawyer. And the reason that I say that is that cognitive difficulties can sneak up gradually. And if you find yourself needing to do a power of attorney and you can't answer a lawyer's questions to his or her satisfaction, he or she may refuse to create your documents. And I speak from personal experience here. My father, I was his power of attorney, made all the decisions. He had a power of attorney for property set up, but he did not have one for personal care. Fortunately, we sneaked in under the wire because not long after our lawyer drew it up, my dad lost the ability to sign his name. And had he lost that ability, I would not have been able to have a power of attorney for personal care set up for my father. Step number 7 is a plan for emergencies. We all obviously need to have this. We need to have first aid kits in the obvious places, home, car, cottage, camp. We always need to know where the nearest hospital is. We need to know where our poison center is. This is the Ontario Poison Center number, but every province will have one. And the reason I include this is that the poison center copes with a lot of different issues, from not only taking a noxious substance, but they also cope with drug interactions. I advise that everyone keep a card in their purse or wallet with all emergency numbers, including the following information, which should be posted in the home, normally on the refrigerator in case there is a need for paramedics to visit. So that information should include the names of substitute decision makers or powers of attorney for personal care, any information on health conditions that one copes with, and also if there's information signed by you and your doctor that you have a do not resuscitate order in place. So all of this information needs to be in your wallet in case of an accident and in the home in case of the need for a paramedic visit. If you have to go to the hospital, these are the basics. You need to make sure your wristband is correct, that your name is correct, your date of birth is correct, that any drug allergies you have are correct. Insist on clean hands. Make sure that anyone who touches you, including visitors, wash their hands. And also make sure that your attending doctor knows that you want to know and your caregiver wants to know if there's any medications added to your regime and why they're being added and what possible interactions may occur as a result of these new medications. If you have to go to hospital, be in hospital, it helps to have a family member or friend there as much as possible, because you as a patient will not be able to absorb and remember what's going on. It helps to keep a notebook and pen by the bed so that somebody can record the people who attend you and that you can record questions and answers in the notebook. Also, you need to understand the discharge planning process, and you need to be able to speak to a social worker or a care manager as soon as possible so that you understand what's involved in discharge planning, if there's any insurance coverage available. And once again, before you leave the hospital, understand what medications and equipment needs you need, because once you get home, in many cases, you are on your own. Step number 8, we're looking at creating an advanced care or end-of-life plan. Advanced care planning helps you ensure that you get the care that you want if you cannot speak for yourself and other people are making care decisions for you. And your preferences may be put into an advanced directive, a power of attorney for personal care, which is Ontario, a representation agreement, which is what it's called in BC, or a personal directive, which is what it's called in Alberta. And once again, you can see that every province has its own terminology and way of doing things. Advanced care planning is something that takes place over time because it requires conversations, decisions, and identifying for you who you want to look after your financial affairs, your property, and who you trust and want to look after or be responsible for your personal care. So advanced care planning reflects changes that are going on in your life and wishes over time. And the person who you choose may be called your substitute decision maker, your agent, or your representative, again, depending on where you live. Please understand that an advanced care plan is a living document. And what I mean by that is that it can and needs to be changed as circumstances change. It can be an oral document, it can be a written document, but it needs to be changed if something in your life has changed. Let's look at the power of attorney for property, which is part of an advanced care plan. This power of attorney, or this individual, is the person who will act for you in all your financial dealings, your banking needs, your real estate needs, or purchasing any major goods. You must be mentally capable to sign a power of attorney for property. And once again, each province or territory has its own laws, and you need to follow these laws in your own province about who can act for you and the age of action and so on. The other power of attorney is your personal care, your personal directive person, or your representation person. This is the person who makes your personal care decisions. This person is your substitute decision maker. This person only becomes active if you become incapable. That's when this person starts to make decisions for you. And this person, because of the conversations you have had over time, knows what's important to you, knows where you want to live, how you want to live, what's important for you to eat, to wear, the kind of care that you will accept, that you want, and how you want to live out your life, how you want to feel safe, where you will feel safe. That's why it takes time to talk about a power of attorney for personal care, because the person who acts for you really is making the decisions that you would have made had you been able to. Now, some of the care decisions that could come up at the end of life are decisions around CPR or a CPR. I know that when this came up for my father, because of his severe dementia, I said no CPR because it would have broken his ribs and would have been completely ineffective for him at the end of life. There may be a question about ventilator use. There may be a question about artificial nutrition, tube feeding, or hydration through IV or intravenous, and also comfort care at the end of life, which is what we call palliative care. And that involves the comfort care measures that a person wants, how one looks after emotional, spiritual needs, and practical needs wrapped around physical care at the end of life. These are some of the issues that come up that an agent or a power of attorney would have to deal with. Organ planning comes up at the end of life, and it's an opportunity for people to consider organ donation. Although people with MS cannot give blood or donate bone marrow, you can donate organs. And the reasoning behind this decision is that people who receive organs can be told about a health condition and are in a position to accept or reject any associated risks. But they are not in a position to do that with blood donors and blood transfusions. So that's why people with MS cannot donate blood. Again, step number 8, end-of-life care. how do you keep your directives up to date? It's very easy to talk to your lawyer, to get things done, to get the documents put away. What isn't so easy is to keep them updated. And I found this plan online, the 5 Ds, and I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense, and it's very easy. So you need to look at your powers of attorney and your wishes in the following circumstances. Every time you've aged 10 years, you need to take a look to make sure things still apply. If there's been a death of a loved one or someone who's important to you, if you are experiencing a divorce or another family change, if there's a diagnosis of another medical problem, and if there's a noticeable decline or deterioration from your MS, and especially when it's going to change your ability to live independently. These are all times when you need to revisit your powers of attorney to make sure that they still meet your needs. Another part is Step A is something that is very new to Canadians. It's MAID, or medical assistance in dying, and it's something that we all need to understand. And one of the reasons that we need to understand it is because families struggle so many ways, financially, spiritually, during an extended illness, and particularly at the end of life. So it's really important to understand medical assistance in dying. This national legislation came in June 2016, and as of June of this year, 3,714 people have benefited from MAID deaths. Many more have requested and have not been granted the opportunity. You have to be 18 years of age to be considered. You need to have a serious, incurable disease or disability that is causing you intolerable suffering. Your death has to be reasonably foreseen, and you must be able to provide informed consent that at the time that you request MAID. This is problematic in a particular instance for those with dementia. And it's problematic because a person may maybe want to do paperwork for MAID when they're still well, because they fear they may suffer from dementia and may be unable to provide informed consent. And unfortunately, the legislation does not provide the ability to do this. You cannot request for MAID ahead of time. You must request it when you need it, and you must be able to provide informed consent. The average age of MAID is 73, which I personally find very young. The oldest person having ever requested it was 104. And the main reasons for medical assistance in dying were cancer, neurological diseases like ALS, and cardiovascular problems. But things are very active in MAID right now. There are numerous groups who are lobbying for changes regarding informed consent. Step number 9, communicating and updating your plan. You could have done a beautiful job of going through steps 1 to 8, but if nobody knows what you want and what plans you've made, it's all for naught. So you need to take the time to plan, but once you've done that, you will have accomplished 2 really, really important goals. You will have added the missing piece to any retirement planning you may have done, and believe me, in my experience, anybody who's done retirement planning has not done long-term care planning. And secondly, you will have removed a big burden from your family because you have put into place what you want. They understand what you want, and they don't have to guess what you want. And you will all be thankful that you took the time to plan and think ahead. And finally, you've done steps 1 to 9, which allows you the luxury of step 10, celebrating the good days. How do we do that? We find you and your caregiver find things to do together, which may be watching a good documentary on TVO, it may be listening to music, it may be using a reader, a Kindle reader, so that you can share a book. It may be that you create a list, a good day list of things that you can do on a good day. And you pull that list out and you do them. And when you have a bad day, you can go to that list and say, okay, it's not a good day today, but on a good day, I know I can do these things. We all need to understand and take advantage of the good days in our lives, no matter what our circumstances are, because life is too short not to do that. And there always will be good days, and these days will be better once you have done the planning that you need to do to ease your mind. So, in summary, what does long-term care planning give you? Well, it gives you the ability to make decisions and act while you still can, while you can still sign your name, while you are still cognitively able to do the paperwork. It gives you control over care, how much you get, how much you need, the quality, where that care is delivered, and for how long that care is delivered, because you've planned for the cost of that care. And what that allows you, anyone, to do is to live with independence, dignity, and control. And this is something that we all want to do as we age. It is a priceless gift, but it does not come free of charge. It takes time and it takes effort. And finally, I ask you to remember two things. To retain your independence, you've got to learn to ask for and accept help. And I say this because in our culture, the way we are raised to value independence above all. And something happens, and suddenly we're not independent anymore. And that may be because we're older, or it may be because we have a disease like MS. And suddenly we have to learn to ask for and accept help. And the other thing I ask you to remember is the best time to plan for long-term care is before you need it. Because when you are in a crisis, you will be forced to make decisions that may not be the right ones and that you may live to regret. So here are our resources, some of which I have already mentioned. If you want to learn more about organ tissue donation, there's your link. Oh, the one thing I would like to say is that I understand how frustrating it is when you do not have access to the digital links that you can click on. So what I suggest you do is go to Google or whatever search engine you use, type in the name of the resource that you see in bold, and look for the link that comes up that you see on the screen. So you will be able to go to the link for the Safe Living Guide, which I've already referenced. Go for it, the assistive devices guide that I referenced. Here are ways you can learn more about the disability tax credit. And the second resource, the DTC Opening Doors, is an interesting way that investment advisors can look at the disability tax credit. And there's a link for the RDSP, or the Registered Disability Savings Plan. Some general resources for you. The Care Guide is a national website, and it's a place that you can go to source home care providers, retirement home providers, long-term care nursing home providers. They still make print copies as far as I know, but you can also access information online. I've provided you with a link to long-term care residential rates across Canada. I believe they were for 2017, the latest that I could find. The next resource from Patients Who Know, a Hospital Handbook, is an Ontario resource, but it is excellent. For anybody who needs to understand hospitals, who may end up in a hospital, it is fabulous. Speak Up is a wonderful website for advanced care planning. If you want to look at or understand more about vehicle modification, there is a link for you there. If you want to understand more about how a private patient advocate can help you understand your healthcare system, there's a link to the Advo Connection directory. AgeComfort.com is a catalog and a website for assistive devices to help at home or in other care areas. Great catalog. When Love Gets Tough, The Nursing Home Decision is a skinny little book by Doug Manning that was very helpful to me when I had to make a decision about long-term care for my dad. Legacies.ca provides some great information on actually how to do home care. You know, how to perhaps help a person eat, how to change a bed with a person in it, all the kinds of stuff that nobody ever teaches you. Home and Long-Term Care Magazine is a website. It's an Ontario-based magazine, but it is a national website and is loaded with information on all aspects of home and long-term care. And then here's a link to the Heart to Home Meals program that I mentioned to you that at present is only available in Alberta and Ontario, but hopefully expanding. Here is a link getting funding for accessibility equipment in Canada. If you want to learn more about adaptive clothing, there are two links for you here. Adaptive clothing and Silverts, which I actually used for my dad. Next, there's a link, a story I found that actually was in the Globe and Mail on the weekend. I need to find a more satisfying way to live with MS that I thought you might find helpful. And here is a link for people considering long-term care. And what it is CPCA has a program called White Coat Black Art, and it's got all kinds of podcasts relating to care in this country. This one is a podcast that features seniors telling us what it's really like to live in long-term care. It's an excellent podcast, and it's well worth listening to. Here are the resources that I've created over the years, my website, my Care Conversation pamphlet that talks about the care conversation that I mentioned, the Practical Planning Guide for Canadians, a long-term care planner, which is the catalog planner that I created for my dad, and the 10-step long-term care planner. And finally, here's me, how you can find me online and my website, my phone number. And what I would like to do, if it's all right, is before we open up the field to questions, I hope we have a few moments to address some questions that came in advance of the presentation. The first one is, please address the issue of verbal and physical abuse and neglect by PSWs in long-term care. Well, this is a hot potato area, as I'm sure most of us understand, and it itself is a presentation. But what I will say is that every day that goes by, there is more attention being paid to the issue of abuse in long-term care. It's come to light in Ontario because of the Luffer case, and in fact is on the radar across this country. It does happen, there's no denying it. It happens between residents, so resident to resident abuse. It happens from resident to care provider, and it happens when a care provider abuses a resident. Why does it happen? It happens for a number of different reasons. It happens because of inadequate staffing, funding. It happens because of cognitive impairments in residents. It happens because of lack of training in care providers. Regardless of how it happens, it's there. And the best way to understand and cope with it is to, first of all, understand that it's a possibility. And secondly, to be very careful when you choose a long-term care facility. And how you do this is to understand the process in your province. Make sure that you visit a number of different facilities, that you have meals in the facilities, that you actually, the person with MS may be able to spend a respite visit there so they get to understand what it's like to live there. Talk to residents, talk to families. There's a lot you can do to make decisions about choosing a long-term care facility. And finally, listen to the podcast that I brought to your attention. How does one find a well-staffed long-term care facility? Well, it's common knowledge that, first of all, we know that care facilities are either privately owned or publicly owned. And I would advise that you look at publicly owned facilities first, those owned by cities, municipalities, religious groups, and so on. These groups generally take any monies that have been earned by the facilities, and they pour them back into the facilities, whereas privately owned facilities take any profits and, of course, give them to shareholders. Another one is, how do we advance the cause of MAID with respect to dementia? And how I suggest that you go about doing that is express your concern to your physician about your interest in MAID. Understand your physician's views about MAID, your hospital's views about MAID, and the process about MAID. Take your time in doing this, because not all doctors will provide MAID and not all hospitals will. Last question is, how can one help a person who could really benefit from long-term care but resist the choice because they are afraid of losing their independence? And this is a perfectly normal, rational fear. And again, the best suggestion I have is what I said earlier, is understanding the care facilities in your province, visiting them, and listening to the podcast. Because these are the best ways to evaluate long-term care. And I also will tell you from personal experience that many people who move into long-term care absolutely thrive because they are being looked after the way they couldn't be looked after at home. They are getting their medications on time. They are eating better. They are socializing with other people. They aren't isolated. So yes, long-term care facilities can have a bad rap, but they can also provide a tremendous benefit to those who go through their doors and live there. So with that, I conclude my formal remarks, and I turn the presentation over to Jillian.
Thank you so much, Karen, and such a wealth of information you shared this afternoon with us. Thank you so much. I've participated and facilitated many webinars in my days, and I have to say that I still learned quite a bit from your presentation. I have no doubt that others did as well, so thank you for that. I do want to open the forum to questions. Just want to remind people the ways in which people can ask a question to our presenter, Karen Henderson. One, you can ask your question through the chat pod, which some people are doing already. And just as a reminder, only Karen and I can see your question, and it will remain anonymous. Between the two of us, we won't be announcing your name. The alternative is if you wish to ask over the phone, just like we're chatting right now, you can do so by pressing *7, and that unmutes your individual phone line. So *7. I would ask only those that are interested in asking over the phone to unmute their line. Otherwise, just keep it as is. I also want to take a moment to let you know that we have an MS Navigator with us today, Lorene Brazeau. She is with us on the line. And as an MS Navigator, Lorene uses her knowledge and past experience as a Senior Coordinator of Programs and Services for MS Society of Canada, particularly with the Atlantic Division. And she helps those affected by MS navigate the resources that are available, enabling them to enhance their quality of life. So I just want to let everyone know that Lorene is here also to take your questions in addition to Karen. And then finally, before we begin, I just want to note that we will be posting poll questions. I'm going to put the first one up here right now. So I invite you all to take part in them before you leave the session. Your answers are anonymous, but they do help us tailor future webinars to meet your needs. And there's about 5 of them, so if you can stick around for that, that would be great. So going to jump into the first questions. And the first one is do you recommend, this would be for Karen, do you recommend cameras in long-term care rooms that are monitored by loved ones?
this is another issue that has been in the press quite a bit when there has been an issue with abuse, that families who either have experienced it or who are worrying about it have placed cameras in their loved ones' rooms. There's a plus and a minus for making this decision. Obviously, it's an invasion of privacy for the person, the person in the care facility. However, it is also a way for families to watch over their loved ones. It lets the care facility know that Big Brother is watching, so to speak, and that it can ease the mind of the family. So I can't say one way or the other whether it's a thing you should or should not do. It is an alternative, but it very much depends on the personal situation of the person in long-term care. And it's often used because the person in care is cognitively impaired and has a problem communicating or expressing their wishes for care. And it helps ease the family's mind in this regard.
Great, thank you for that. We're going to continue on with another question. What procedures does one follow when there is neglect and or abuse in long-term care? She mentions this particular participant, the Ontario Ombudsman, was very helpful with the issue with respect to a 6:30 bedtime, and that was when snacks were provided at 7:30. Any insight into that? And perhaps Lorraine will maybe get you to jump into if that's applicable.
Well, every province has a slightly different format to go through. There is an ombudsman of some kind in every province. But what I would recommend is that you work your way through the system in a logical format so that for the first person you go to is maybe the charge nurse on the floor, the director of care, and the executive head of the institution, the facility. Because you know what? You want to keep people on your side. And I hate to say this, but sometimes if you go outside the chain of command, that can make things more difficult for the person who is in care. Not always, but it can. So an ombudsman is obviously there when you cannot get satisfaction from within the facility itself. But I do recommend going through the steps that I've outlined first.
Thank you. There's quiet questions or quiet group today. There hasn't been a lot of questions. So I do encourage everyone, if have some nagging issue that you wish to address, now is a great time to do it. There's certainly not many opportunities where you get someone with Karen's expertise on the line and being willing and able to help out. One thing that I know has come up before, Karen, and again, Lorraine, I bring you into this conversation as well, is when there's resistance. And I know you touched on this a little bit, Karen, in your work, but if there is that sort of resistance to moving into a long-term care home from a person, and yet the care partner feels strongly that it's the right move for everyone's sake, if you can maybe speak to just a little bit more on how to tackle that challenge.
Yeah, it is a big challenge, and it's a very prevalent challenge when it comes to long-term care. There are very few people who actually make the decision independently to move. And what I counsel families on is, first of all, to try and understand the reasons that the individual is reluctant to move. And sometimes these are very evident, and sometimes they're not. And they need to be talked through and understood and accepted. Secondly, the caregiver, the family, needs to be very open with the person and say, you know what, we can't cope anymore. I am sick. I am tired. As your caregiver, I love you very much, but I simply can't go on anymore. And I want to be able, as your caregiver, to be here for you. And I will be here for you no matter where you live. But the time has come that my health needs to be taken into consideration along with yours. And finally, that moving into long-term care is not the worst thing in the world. As I've already said, that it can make a world of difference into the well-being of the person who moves there. Their health is better, their spirits are better, their socialization is better, they can go to activities that they may not have been able to do before. So it can be a really, really good move for both parties, for both the caregiver and the care receiver, but it can be a challenge to get to that decision. But the decision can be made with good communication and with proper research of the availability of facilities, what each offers, and how it can meet the needs of the family.
Thank you. And just to add to that conversation, Karen, also I think the notion of sometimes there's promises that are made in the beginning. I promised my mom or I promised my spouse that I would never put them in long-term care, and recognition that sometimes things have to change. So I'm wondering if you can touch on maybe the guilt that's involved if those promises have to be broken.
Absolutely. The one thing, a very painful lesson that a lot of caregivers learn is that don't make promises that you can't keep. And it is very easy to say to a loved one, I promise you that I will never place you in a care facility. I promise you that I will never sell the family home. I was put in this position with my father, and I didn't make those promises, and I'm so glad I didn't, because I did have to place him in care and I did have to sell the family home. So obviously it's better to understand at the beginning of the caregiving experience not to make any promises. The best thing to say is, please know that I will be here for you. Please know that I will make the absolute best decisions that I possibly can for you. But if you have made a promise, and if you have to break it, you're going to have to talk about it and say, I know I made this promise, and I have to break it, and here are the reasons why I have to break it. So again, really good communication is so important, but try to avoid making promises in the first place.
Thank you. Great answer, and great insight, actually. Okay, so we're going to just switch gears here, and this is an interesting question that I think could impact a number of people on the line. So the question is, are there some long-term care facilities that you might suggest or I guess maybe look for younger people, for example, those with MS in their 40s, who need physical assistance, such as cooking and cleaning and laundry, but can do the personal care for themselves, like bathing and dressing?
This is a huge challenge because most care facilities are designed for older people. And I quite frankly don't think that provincial governments have figured out how to cope with this issue because there are younger people in long-term care, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And I can't give you a standard answer for the problem. But what I can advise you is to advocate in your own province for these needs, for a place for younger people to go, because if there's no complaints and if there's no requests, nothing's going to change. So strong advocacy is very, very important on behalf of both the MS Society and on behalf of individual families.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's Lorraine here. I just wanted to add to that age-appropriate care is a priority of our government relations department. So certainly individuals are encouraged to get in touch with government relations to discuss their concerns, because the larger number of voices that we have, the better are they positioned to address this concern with government.
Thank you, Lorraine. And I just want to make mention, Lorraine was generous in sharing some resources that I've put that into the chat pod there with respect to the patient concern resolution process. Lorraine, do you want to just touch on that for a moment, if you can?
Yeah, well, it's a really great site, and it is broken down by province. And it really just helps people to address the concerns that they're having when it involves the care of a loved one or within healthcare, so whether it's a physician or a nurse or the appropriate supervisor. So it's kind of a step-by-step guide in terms of where to go first, and if you fail to receive any resolution within each step, how to proceed to go to higher resources. So, and that once again is the patient concern resolution process.
Thank you. And just a few comments to share by one participant here. This lady says, having worked for numerous years, ultimately, unless one is deemed incompetent of person, people have the right to live at risk. Also, families have the right to be honest about their needs and capabilities. And she asks that we remind people that not everyone has altruistic family members who are always thinking, too, of the person's rights. Some families feel it is their right, and that needs to be clarified for people listening whose situations are not necessarily ideal family situations. So Lorene and Karen, I'm sure both of you can speak to different family dynamics at work and at play at times.
That's a very good comment. Thank you, whoever delivered that comment. And it's very true. Unless you are declared medically or incompetent, you cannot be moved from your present accommodation against your will. Not all families look, by the way, that's called dignity of risk. And what that means is that the individual, because they are competent, have the right to live how they see fit, regardless of whether the family thinks it's unsafe, because they're worried about the person may fall or get lost or whatever. So that's an important point. It's called dignity of risk. And you're very right that not all families have the care receiver. They don't look at the care receiver in an altruistic way. And that's unfortunate because most of us would like to feel that our families would step up to the plate in the most honest and honorable ways, but it isn't reality. And so, again, if there's a problem in a family, in your family with this, then you need to seek outside support from a physician or from another professional, maybe a legal professional, for example, who can help you. In Ontario, we have several organizations. One of them is called the Advocacy Center for the Elderly, or ACE, ACE, where families can call when there's a problem with this kind of thing. But most provinces have their own version of ACE, and it's a great resource for legal concerns in particular.
Thank you for sharing that, Karen. That's great. We're going to keep just plugging away. There's a couple more minutes left, and we still have some questions, so hopefully we can manage to get to some of them, if not all of them. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and Karen, this with respect to you, what's your opinion regarding placing other people's names on your property title, such as your home, in preparation for advanced care planning? Is that something that you would recommend or have seen people do in the past?
I don't recommend anything that has to do with legal stuff. I recommend that you talk to your lawyer because it's dependent on your personal circumstances and the province where you live. So please make any decisions like that with the guidance of your lawyer. Perfect.
Okay, and we're going to keep going. So this, I hope I get this right. So this individual talks about family members that were requesting care improvements, and they had actually been, to use the term that's written here, banned from a long-term care unit where their mother was. So she goes on to ask what resources are available to banned family members, as 2 RNs have been banned by my mother's long-term care facility, and this concerns me. So have you had experience with this before, Karen, where there's family members that have actually been, I guess, to use the term, banned from somebody's long-term care home?
Yes, I personally have not experienced it because I was never banned, and I don't know any of my caregiver friends who were banned. But it has happened. I've heard about it. And the circumstances leading to the banning are always complex. There's always two sides to a story. And it is concerning for families. And I think here the way to repair this is, again, through communication, through trying to understand the other party, either the family or the care facility, and to try to come to a working relationship that does not harm the person in care, because that's really the person who's at the center of everything and who ultimately will suffer. And that's not right, and that should not happen. So sometimes we've got to swallow something, our pride or whatever, and try and make amends with a care facility if we're the family. And if that doesn't work, and if as a family you feel disadvantaged or banned for the wrong reasons, then you need to work your way through the process again. And then if there's no way that this is going to get worked out at the facility level, then you need to go higher to the ombudsman level or whatever to try and get this resolved, because it is a very unhealthy situation. I guess there's always the option no, I shouldn't say always. There can be the option of moving the individual to another care facility, but that becomes problematic because it will take that individual months and months to readjust to a new facility. And the problem may arise again depending on the conversation or the dialogue or the relationship between the family and the care facility.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so I think we're going to have to leave it there. I have a feeling we could go on and on with this discussion. It's such an interesting topic, and it affects so many of us. But I do have to close. I do want to thank everyone for their participation. It always makes for some great interaction when we have lots of questions and comments going through, so thank you for that. And, of course, I would like to thank our presenter, Karen Henderson, and our MS navigator, Ms. Lorraine Brazeau. I do want to remind you two things before we go. A recording of this webinar will be available on the MS Society of Canada's website within a few days, and you will also be receiving an email shortly just requesting your participation in a survey from MS Canada. So please keep an eye on it in your inboxes. We do have my colleague Yenny Yu that's here with MS Canada to say some final words. Yenny, are you available?
Hi there.
Yenny, are you there?
Yes.
There we go.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and participating on our webinar today, and to invite you to check back with us in the fall when we'll be back with several more sessions. And if you have any topics that you would like us to cover in our education webinars, then please send us your feedback in the survey links that you will be sent after this session. So thank you all for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.